Help Desk YouTube video series. And I want to remember this time. I'm Big J.
I'm Little J.
All right. And we're here today to talk about group process, mental health. My favorite, one of my favorites. I guess they're all my favorite. I know, I was going to say all of them are my favorites. Okay, so again, I'm the kind of clinician who has to have this process mapped out in front of me. Okay, so when I begin with any situation in group process, I immediately begin with understanding my diagnosis, the etiology, and the prognosis. And a lot of the times when you set that up, right, your prognosis is going to be based on where you are. So that could mean that you're talking about a acute care situation, a rehab situation, skilled nursing, or a partial hospitalization, all right, or perhaps a psychosocial clubhouse, or a halfway house, or a quarter house, and oh my, I mean, there's so many different ones. And I'm always amazed at our depth of what OT can do in this world. But group process is really important. So we begin with that diagnosis, the etiology, and then the prognosis. And then what we always do is we begin the history intake, okay, along with that screen and that observation, okay? Now, we know, because I love this question, can an occupational therapy assistant run a group without us doing the history intake, the screen, and the observation?
No, it's still like everything else we do in the OT process, is that they wouldn't be able to do an intervention before the evaluation had been completed, and it's the same way here. You still need to identify their needs first before to determine their appropriateness for a group before they would be appropriate for that.
So in group process, we still have to do that. We still have to understand that OC profile assessment, okay, and then the needs of our client, and go through that initial introductory phase where we observe and we interview.
Right.
Now, there has to be, because we're talking about group process, so we're going to run a group here. So the most logical group, okay, when you begin in acute care, okay, is going to be the evaluation group.
Right.
Initially, in this part of the process, we should be considering an evaluation group.
Right.
So an evaluation group, okay, is what's the purpose of an evaluation group?
So you're basically trying to find out where they're at in terms of their social functioning so that you can place them appropriately in a group, or to see if they're even appropriate to be participating in a group. So in that evaluation group, you're going to want to choose the tasks for them that can be completed in one setting, because you want to make sure that it's appropriate in terms of the activity, the length of time it's going to take. But you also want to make sure that the activity does require some form of social participation. You don't want to choose something that can be completed in isolation, because then you're not really getting a true indication of where they're functioning at socially in terms of their appropriateness for a group. So you want a short-term activity that can be completed in one session, and you want to make sure the activity is going to require some social interaction, some social participation, so that you can assess that.
So, and that's what you're looking to assess. Now let's back up, because we need to consider the group levels. Now, they're the famous Mosey group levels, and they're amazing to me when I think about it. The very first level of a group is going to be parallel. Okay, and parallel is usually, it's going to be a 2-year-old, to a 4-year-old grade average, is in terms of that. And when you start off with the group levels, okay, it's always interesting to me, because we're going to use these levels of where a child is, right? But it's for mental illness.
Right.
And you have to step back for that. So you have these group levels, and what happens is there is a parallel group, there is a project group. which Joseph just got done really talking about, is a project group. A project group is the first time really that there's interaction between, the group members.
Right.
And we're looking for that in an evaluation group. So understand that part of it, because if you run an evaluation group that's parallel, okay, you would just be having individuals in the group doing something where they're not relating to others, because that's parallel.
Right, exactly. So, and you wouldn't want that because you need to observe their social interaction abilities.
Many little kiddos at age 2 will play in a group. So from 2, at that early point, they'll play in a group situation, but they're not going to share, they're not going to interact. In fact, it makes for some great fights when they're stealing each other's trucks. When the one reaches across, the next thing you know, they're brawling, at daycare centers or something like that. It's a good one to watch. Okay, all right, but so you think about that, right? Because that's what I always do. I always think about Mosey's level, and I think about what we're dealing with, in each one of these groups. So the next group after, so we have parallel, we have project, and the next group's going to be egocentric cooperative. Okay, now in the egocentric cooperative group, what's happening is the person is beginning to recognize that others, okay, have feelings. All right, so because in the first project one, they're recognizing that there's others, and they're initiating that conversation between and beginning to work together. But in an egocentric cooperative group, it's what it is. They begin to cooperate because they realize that there are other people, and that those other people can contribute to the group. Now, when we move away from an egocentric cooperative, okay, we move to the next level, which is known as cooperative. Okay, and you guys, everybody who's an OT student now understands cooperative and mature group, mature being the last one. A cooperative is really when you get together and you work together as a group, okay, and you recognize that there are different, aspects of the relationship now. So we're building relationships at this level, and we're starting to trust each other, in a group, and starting to, actually rely on one another. Now, when you hit the mature group, the highest level group, mature can pretty much function, okay, where this group, which we're all used to, these are high level groups. This is your master's theses, or working together with a group of students, OT students, where, they're going to rely heavily on each other to complete, different parts of a project together, and they're going to be able to synthesize and work among each other, kind of recognizing the strengths of the people in the group and how they can use those.
Right.
Now with group process and thinking about these different groups, there comes the idea of different types of leaderships. Now, there's 3 types of leaderships that we probably should focus on here.
Right.
What are they?
We got directive leadership, we've got facilitative leadership, and advisory leadership.
All right. So in the parallel group, first group, and the project group, they're going to be
directive. You're definitely going to be using directive leadership.
And what happens in directive? What is the leader doing?
So the leader is going to be totally responsible for guiding the group. They're going to be choosing the activities for the group. They're going to be meeting all of the social emotional needs of the members. And so that's going to be more directive leadership. They're going to really take charge of the group, and the group members are going to be pretty much solely participants, and they won't have as much of a say in choosing the activities or in meeting the emotional needs of others.
That's the key. One of the biggest issues in all these groups is the emotional needs. So in a parallel and project group, directive leadership has to meet the emotional needs. So in other words, hey Joseph, what you just said, not appropriate. Okay, I'm going to use the technique many times of redirecting, and redirecting is that process of saying to someone, hey, what you just said isn't appropriate for this type of group setting. Or, somebody makes an inappropriate comment and you end up, countering them as a leader. You can't let it go.
Right.
Because you're liable to have a mega fight on your hands if you're in a group that's parallel, right? Parallel is that little kiddo who grabbed the truck from the other guy and starts swinging, and the other guy freaks out and clubs him, you know? Well, guess what? You can have that happen in a parallel group with a group of individuals suffering from mental illness, i.e. schizophrenia, with somebody who's still psychotic or something of that nature. So when we move up the level to the next one, it's easy if you ask me, because you got directive, you got facilitative.
Yep.
And so that's an egocentric cooperative group. So what's your perception on what happens there?
So with facilitative leadership, the group members are going to be able to start to have a little bit more of a say in terms of what activities they're going to be completing there. So they're going to start to also begin to meet some of each other's social emotional needs. They're going to be encouraged to do that, whereas in the parallel and project groups where there was directive leadership, the OT was meeting all the social emotional needs, and the facilitative leadership and the egocentric cooperative group, the group members are going to start to be encouraged to meet each other's social emotional needs. And then, as you were talking about with conflict, whereas in the parallel group and the project group, the OT was solely responsible for redirecting them, and the facilitative leadership with the egocentric cooperative group, you could start to guide the members' reactions to conflict. So you could use that as a way to guide the group members to, essentially come to their own responses to that.
Nice. So you're building now, right? And this is what happens. Individuals come into, for example, and I'll use the context of settings. Individuals come into acute care, and a lot of times they're there many times for medication adjustments. And because they stop taking their medications, whether it's an individual who suffers from schizophrenia, manic, bipolar, somebody who's severely depressed, while their medication is being, adjusted or they're taking it again, okay, the individual is now beginning, to change. Okay, so in acute care, as we mentioned, you're going to see that parallel in that project group. As you move into rehab, you'll see more groups that'll be adjusting upwards, to the egocentric cooperative with the facilitative style leadership.
Right.
And then eventually into the mature or into the cooperative and mature groups. A lot of times people are headed out the door,
Right.
When they're there. So you'll see them in rehab settings, and then possibly more in a setting, for example, like a partial hospitalization or a psychosocial clubhouse.
Right.
So the actual context, the setting makes a difference.
Do we want to talk about I think we talked about the directive leadership and the facilitative. Do we want to talk advisory now?
Yeah, let's do that. Okay, so he's keeping me on track. All right, but it makes sense. So when an individual moves from an egocentric cooperative to a cooperative, at that point, the leadership changes.
It does.
Right?
So you're going to be in an advisory leadership capacity now, which basically means that the OT is just going to provide advice to them as needed. And the group members are really going to be responding to each other's social emotional needs at this point. And just come into the OT for advice as they need it, but they're going to be responsible for running the group essentially. The OT may still be there, but they're just going to be used for advice, but the members are going to be running the group. They're going to be responding to each other's social emotional needs as well.
You got it. And this is a big difference in even context and settings. So let's use an example. In the psychosocial clubhouse, what type of groups might you see run?
It's logical that you're going to see advisory groups run, or groups run where the OT is acting in an advisory capacity, I should say. And it makes sense because if we think about the requirements for being in a psychosocial clubhouse and what's expected of a member of a psychosocial clubhouse, they have to be able to participate in the shared governance of the psychosocial clubhouse.
So that's a different ball game. The psychosocial clubhouse, it's a high level group.
Exactly.
So you're going to see more cooperative and advisory type stuff going on in there, but it's not going to be very formal. It won't be formal because of the shared governance aspect of it and what that means. So, now we covered a lot of ground here, but again, the process, okay, just review real quick, is you need to know your diagnosis, your etiology, and your prognosis. Those things really make a difference.
They do.
You need to understand that in order to get to the purpose of a group, okay, you need to be really understanding of that screening and observation, the needs assessment for the OC profile. And then finally, the context and the setting for that group make a difference, where you are, whether it's acute or whether you're in psychosocial clubhouse. We know that we talked about the types of leadership, the 3 types. We really delved into Mosey's group levels, which you gotta know those inside and out. There's a lot to this, okay, but taking it step by step and building on it the way we did here today is one of the ways that we teach at OT Help Desk for individuals to clinically reason, through a process. Anybody can memorize things. The real key to OT Help Desk is the fact that what we do is we help students to understand how to reason and apply that, okay, in both a clinical situation as well as in a test situation. You want to end, because I did all the talking here. You want to end this thing today? What do we want to tell them about?
So we want to say join us at OT Help Desk, and as always, like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time.
All right, take care, everybody.